long. And the premise was going to be that narrator, the same narrator, first-person narrator, would meet famous people. And so the name of the book that never got fully written was called My Famous Friends. And the one I lost featured Don Rickles.
It's a great story.
So this one's a little bit different. It's maybe a little bit more serious or not, but it's called Arnold Palmer, and I'm dressed appropriately, and actually I even have my cap that I wore today when I was playing golf. I don't think I'll put it on. It's an apple cap, and you see the color it was, and it's aging like I am to a whole different color. But anyway, this story is called Arnold Palmer. I suppose every golfer dreams of sometime playing with a great player like Arnold Palmer, for example, but it was never my dream. I picked up golf about my second year or so working at Superior Landscaping. All the guys there played softball, of course. That was just an excuse to drink beer. But many of them also played golf, again, to drink beer. But there was something else, something more serious. Surprisingly, it was nature. More surprising, it was the aesthetics of nature. Even for guys like me who just hauled around loads of topsoil, baby pine trees, and plats of geraniums. I couldn't figure it out at first. I mean, these guys talked about ripping drives down the fairway and blowing putts and taking 3 swings to get out of the goddamn sand and trying to break 100, much less 90 or 80. But then nature would creep into the bravado, and they would talk about the length of the rough and the bent grass greens and the strategic placement of new trees along the fairway. They would talk about interacting with nature, how to shape shots around trees, how to firm a putt against the grain of the green, and how to swing a 5-iron on a downhill lie. That type of talk intrigued me. This had to come from working in the nursery because the few other people I knew who played golf, including my Auntie Marge, only talked about equipment. Auntie could talk about this club or that club and what balls to hit for distance and spin, this despite the fact she hadn't played in years. I'd visit Auntie once a month or so in her faded Manhattan apartment. One day in the late autumn, when I casually mentioned golf to her and said that I might like to try it, she asked if I had clubs. She suspected that I didn't and couldn't afford any. So she marched me to a closet off her kitchen and showed me 3 complete sets of clubs in 3 different bags propped up one beside another next to the broom and mop. Now, of course, they were all women's clubs, but one bag was a passable dark blue, the second was white, the third a shocking pink, and she selected various clubs that could pass as masculine. We sorted clubs for half an hour and then sorted balls and tees. I would have to buy my own glove and shoes, she said. And then we worked for almost a full hour learning to grip every club and then practice putting on her Persian rug in the living room. She claimed the Persian best simulated a, quote, fuzzy green. It became a little tedious putting for an hour every time I visited, but I was grateful for the free clubs, even though the head covers for the woods were a baby blue. Nevertheless, putting on the Persian rug helped pass the time over the long winter. When spring arrived, I was busy in the nursery, and I had no desire to golf with my co-workers. Plus, like most beginning golfers, I didn't want to embarrass myself. I knew that my co-workers weren't very good, but they had to be better than me my first time out. On my off days, I started golfing at a golf course that had a driving range off to one side. I realized at once the barren driving range with its worn yardage markers wasn't offering me much for the aesthetics of the game or for the aesthetics of nature. Plus I found I had to concentrate so hard just to get the yellow striped practice balls airborne that it wasn't much fun either. I did better on the putting green. I just imagined being in Auntie's living room with her cold, calculating gaze and her ordering me not to move my head or look at my putt. She would inform me if my putt rolled into the glass tumbler or not. Since my hours at the nursery were irregular because of evening and weekend work, I went to the golf course at odd hours during the week. I often was the only person at the driving range or on the putting green. Sometimes there was hardly anybody else even playing golf. Maybe a couple of old fellows playing a morning round. Occasionally a couple of kids skipping school. But there was certainly no impediment for me to pay $12 for 9 holes and tee it up and play it alone, just for the experience. No one to comment on my worm burner or duck hook, terms I had picked up at work. Still, I hesitated to play. I would sit at a dark green picnic table and look at the first tee with its white and red tee markers. I had figured out the guys hit from the whites. I would look down the first fairway. A gray on blue wooden sign informed me that number 1 was a par 4 playing at 342 yards. To the right was a driving range. To my left was a row of trees. The rest of the course veered off to the left on the other side of the trees because beyond the first green was a highway. The highway I had taken, in fact, to get to the course. I suppose that it was possible to hit a ball on your second or third or fourth shot clear over the green so that it bounced among the cars on the highway. That was not a comforting thought. Since this was as far as I had ventured onto the course itself, I tried to study the first hole as part of nature. There was a long swath of green grass in 2 distinct shades, the fairway a lighter green, and the rough a darker green. The trees were not tall and were not well pruned. On purpose? The trees appeared to be bur oak and locusts, with scrub pines filling in the gaps. There was an occasional ornamental tree, flowering crab apples, I thought, as I peered from them at a distance. The crab apples were planted out from the forest and closer to the fairway. They seemed better groomed and shaped than the scraggly trees behind them. Now filled with white flowers in the spring, they marked the golfer's progression down the fairway 50 yards at a time. I picked up a scorecard at the counter when I paid my $3 for my bucket of range balls. A pretty brown-haired young woman, maybe the owner's daughter, worked behind the counter mornings. She was an eclectic reader, sometimes reading a Stephen King paperback and at other times something by Emerson or Thoreau. Maybe she took university classes online. I sat on the picnic bench behind the first tee, looking at the drawing of the course on the black and white scorecard, and then looking over and over again down the first fairway. The schematic of the first hole indicated a sand trap to the left of the green. A bunker, as I later learned, was the correct reference. But I couldn't see the bunker, even if I stood on the bench. The bunker must have been tucked down around the edge of the green, or else there was a little ridge or hill in front of the green that concealed the bunker, or else it was just a smudge on the scorecard. But there were other smudges around greens on the scorecard as well, as dots and lines of blue indicating ponds and streams. The scorecard was not unlike the landscape schematic we would sometimes work with at the nursery. A couple of us would haul a truckload of plants to an estate or a new business and then dump them at various spots according to the blueprint design. If the job was small, we would just go ahead and plant the stuff as well. But sometimes the job was big enough and important enough that the boss came along, and usually with the client, painfully plodded around, marking exactly where each planting would go by driving a small colored stake into the ground. The process was so mind-numbing that it drove me nuts. But now, during these spring mornings, sitting at the picnic table, staring down the fairway, something about that tedious planning began to make sense. It had to do with my inability to step up between the white markers, tee up one of Auntie's used Titleists, and then try to stroke the ball down the fairway. It was as if if it was just nature out there, I probably could have done it. No different than hitting a rock-hard practice ball toward a dilapidated sign with the spaced-out numbers 150. However, on the golf course itself, it was not just nature. It was nature contrived. It was nature organized like the front lawn of a large house with its set pieces of bushes and flowering trees, ground cover, and goldfish ponds. I went so far in my musing to see the golf course as Melville's white whale, a symbolic contrivance of an indifferent yet vengeful author. A golfer's first act on the first hole is to poke the monster with a sharp tee, and then for hours the golfer would continue to poke and stab it with iron rods and sharp objects. Yet it's not the personification of the land that is a problem. It was more the relationship between the man's ego who had molded the land into the golf course and the man now who was playing the game. The sixth time I sat at that picnic table, Arnold Palmer came up to me and asked if I was waiting to tee off. He said if I didn't mind, he would like to play 3 or 4 holes with me. You see, when this happened, and I won't go into why Arnold Palmer was at this wayside golf course, although he had a very legitimate reason, I suddenly felt ready to play golf. And it didn't matter that I was going to play my first holes with one of the greatest golfers of all time. What did matter was that I had figured out the game in relationship to myself. I saw number 1 as an arena that I could step into armed sufficiently with Auntie's clubs. Maybe I was foolish, but I don't think so. Mr. Palmer asked me what I did, and I told him. Then we had a very interesting discussion about ornamental crab apple trees and their place on the golf course as we walked down the first fairway.
All right.